Hi, welcome to Jadekind Gaming. I'm Adam, and today we're going to be doing a flip through and review of the GURPS 4th edition basic set characters book. I got this, I guess, a couple months ago, and I've literally read through it, cover to cover, except I guess stopped a couple pages short. I didn't actually read, verbatim through each of the words in the appendices. The index, rather. So I didn't read the index. Other than the index, I've read every bit of it. And I'm now getting ready on my, Friday night group. I'm going to start running a game with GURPS, with just this book. It says on the back, the GURPS Basic Set Characters is the only book you need to play. Game masters and players wanting more detail will find the companion book GURPS Basic Set Campaigns valuable. I'll be getting that shortly, but with the help of GURPS Lite, which they also have mentioned on the back here, is a free online 32-page PDF that'll explain the rules. It gives enough of the basic, the way the rules work, beyond the book that, to actually run a game. It covers the very basics. Really, this is enough just to try the system out. Is GURPS Lite. So that's an interesting thing too. But I'm going to flip through, and unlike a lot of the other ones, this is a thick book, so I'll be, chunking through. But I'll go over some of the basics of what I've found out through it. Alright. And, for one, GURPS is the generic universal role-playing system. It is really a system, and let's see, I think they explain it best. Universal. Generic is essentially whether or not the game moves at a fast pace, or essentially, whether you make a lot of rules decisions or whether you keep it going. Universal is any setting you can imagine. And this really will support any setting you can imagine. They start with the basics, of course, of what is role-playing. Every role-playing game has to start with that, right? And really, the majority of this book pretty much is creating a character. They introduce character points. Character points is, you have a value of points that you start with. You have a value of disadvantages that you're allowed to take to get more points, and that'll give you the total points that you can create your character with. And they go over the basics here of your main stats, your build, your size, age, how attractive you are, your social standing, how wealthy you are, what tech level. Tech levels is one of the really cool things that they have in the system. Tech level is essentially ranging from tech level 0 at Stone Age to 12 plus is whatever the GM likes. Tech level 8 is the digital age, and that's really, I guess, where we'd be at. And so essentially it ranges from, stoneman, caveman kind of setting all the way up through whatever you can imagine, sci-fi and all the areas in between. And you could have multiple tech levels in the same campaign where one society is an advanced society. Their use of tech level to determine the way that how technologically advanced different things are, societies, individuals, etc. Your reputation, ranks friends and foes. And then they go into advantages. Advantages are things that set you apart that are cool. Some of them are just normal. Some are, mental, physical, and social. Some are exotic, supernatural, or mundane. And depending on what kind of game it is, you're allowed different ones. Generally, the mundane ones are the ones that people are just allowed. Exotic and supernatural, you have to have a special allowance, depending on what it is. If it's a superhero game, you're probably going to be able to, open to a lot more. If it's a, modern-day war game, you're probably going to be restricted to mundane. Because they'll range from, You know, the 360-degree vision of being able to see all around you. And you know, that's a good one to point out. You know, that sees all your... And then they have the special limitation, easy to hit. If, you know, your eyes are on stalks or something, like, they give it where you can modify the number of points, because every advantage has a number of points. You can modify it with a percentage, depending on, you know, if it has this negative. There are also ones that have advantages that make it take more points, or there's a whole list at the end of the section that can modify, you know, a huge groups of them. You know, allies, you know, you can, you know, have it where you essentially have people, different allies, sidekicks, all that kind of thing. There are different abilities to take for those. Yeah, there was one I loved. Let me see. Common Sense is one that I absolutely loved. I've had, as a game master who's had players that are stupid. Anytime you you know, the player would take this for 10 points. Anytime you start to do something the GM feels is stupid, he will roll against your IQ score, which is one of your stats. A successful roll means he must warn you. Something like, hadn't you better think about that? Or, and this advantage lets an impulsive player take the part of a thoughtful character. Because I've had, you know, players that have really good intelligence, but because the player just is sort of that jump in and go, they'll do things that they shouldn't. You know, some of them will reference like higher tech level references the beginning. You know, your character itself could have a higher tech level than the rest of the setting. You know, the ability to heal others, which could really be like healing. That gives you the ability to heal other people's injuries, and it's like sort of a supernatural one here. That could be like a way to do magic or psionics. Or it could just be like some sort of alien power, depending on really how you build it. All these abilities, you can really, depending on how you make the fluff around them, they're different kinds of abilities. Anyways, as we go through, and they cover so many things like that one. Racial memory, having memories of other people of your race. You know. They just cover so many different ideas. Huge, broad spectrums. Anyways, modifiers. They have enhancements. A lot of the modifiers at the end go to all the different attack skills, which will have that, but of course some of them don't. And they're essentially, these are modifiers like the enhancements and limitations I mentioned before with the percentages. They modify things by %. But these are ones that would apply to so many different abilities that it's better just to put them all at the end of the sections. They have enhancements and they have limitations. And then they have an optional rule for limiting enhancements. You can really, you know, get down to it and break things down to do whatever you want. And then we have Chapter 3 is disadvantages. Disadvantages ultimately are one of the ways that you earn more points for your character. By taking different negative things to your character, whether it's actually something bad or sometimes it's something really good, like being like super generous is a disadvantage because it sort of limits your character's actions. So, you know, it might not be it might not give you a huge number of points back, but it would be a negative as opposed to being a positive thing if you're the kind of guy that's going to go giving your money away. Regardless of how society would think of that as a positive trait. But they're really good to use to flesh out your character and give them flaws and make them seem realistic. And they mention here, you know, you can buy off disadvantages through play, so as you get over certain negative things, some of the disadvantages, you can essentially give the points back to get rid of the disadvantage. You know, from bad back, being, you know, having alcoholism, bad sight, you know, being cold-blooded creature, you're completely colorblind, to being curious. You know, curious is worth, you know, you get 5 points back, and it's just sort of a naturally inquisitive. You know, what's in this cave? What happens if I push this button? can get you into trouble. And this is a good point. This book throughout has such great art from all sorts of different settings. I'm sure that's one of the things you're noticing as I'm flipping through here. It's just some of the cool art that they have in here. You know, they really went all out. You know, having enemies. You can have, you know, they have a huge section here on different enemies, different powers of enemies, different numbers of enemies. You know, essentially people that are constantly out to get you. You know, they have you know, I know they have some where, you know, you're missing a leg or missing an eye, or have no legs. You know, being blind, one eye, one hand, one arm. Restricted peripheral vision. You know, uncontrollable appetite. That'd be like for like a vampire. You know, can't stop that thirst for blood. You know, they have quirks, just like they had perks I didn't mention in the advantages, and then quirks. They're essentially 1-point negatives. Perks or 1-point positives. They're essentially really watered down versions of other abilities a lot of the time that have very little effect, but there's something. Then we get to skills. There are a lot of skills. There's a huge number of skills. Essentially, depending on how difficult the skill is, it costs a certain number of points to get it to make it where it is at a skill level based on the attribute that it's relative to. So, I'm just going to find one. I want to find one that has a couple defaults, because things will... Here we go. Armory. This first one right here. Armory is dependent on tech level. In other words, different tech levels have... The armory skill will do different things, just because at some time, you know, at some tech levels you have, you know, force shields. Other tech levels, it's gonna be, you know, missile weapons, small arms, vehicular armor, just normal unpowered body armor, like, you know, in the bronze, you know, like to smith bronze. So from smithing bronze to creating a force shield, all covered in the armory. You have to, the little T is you have to choose a specialty. You have to specialize in a certain type of armory. Armory is a IQ average ability, which means on that chart before, you would go, it's average. For 1 point, it would be 1 less than whatever your IQ was. For 8 points, it would be 2 more than what your IQ was. However, if you don't have any points into it, it defaults to IQ minus 5. So 1 point puts it to IQ minus 1, 0 points puts it to IQ minus 5. You can still try it. And then if you have the engineer skill, which is another skill later on, it defaults to the engineer of the same specialty at minus 4. So if you're a really good engineer, you still have some ability to do armory. Throughout the skills section, they have the different defaults where if you're good at one skill, it automatically makes you competent at others. It's really great. And there's huge numbers of skills. You know, diplomacy, dancing, economics, electrician, esoteric medicine, fishing, finance, free fall, forgery, hazardous materials, hypnotism, hobby skills, jeweler, linguistics, leadership, melee weapons. Melee weapons is a huge section where it groups a bunch of different types of weapons together, and then within it there are, you know, fencing weapons, flails, swords, and then within that you'd have specialties like swords, which specialize broadsword, force sword, sai, knife, etc. You know, musical instruments, poetry. What is that? You know, the ability to just push someone. It's trained by the master skills. Trained by a master is one of the advantages in the beginning, and it allows you to do various martial arts kind of things. So it's, you know, this is like an actual like martial arts push or whatever. Sumo wrestling, thrown weapons, traps, etc. And then after the skills section is the magic section, which only comes up in games that involve magic. And magic works like skills. Magic has skill lists essentially with different within different categories. Costs. They cost generally it'll cost fatigue, which is one of your secondary attributes to use magic, and a lot of them will have prerequisites of you have to have previous spells within that spell grouping. And they have a decent number of spells in here, and then I know there's another book that has a huge number of more spells, but I mean, at the very least for a game that's a light magic kind of setting, even if you're running a fantasy game that's light magic, you still got, you know, you got the healing spells, light, dark, you have all the basics. It covers, you know, plane shifting, planar summons, different elemental ones, enchanting. So, you know, they cover enough to definitely get you through any sort of light fantasy campaign. And then we go into psionics. Psionics is only for games with psionics, this chapter, and this is a really short chapter. It's like 4 pages. And you have different types of psionics: ESP, psionic healing, psychokinesis, telepathy, teleportation. Within each of those, and then the anti-psi, but within each other than anti-psi, you also have a talent, which you can essentially put points into to become better at those. And psionics work using the advantages in the blue section here, where you would have, you might have the advantage, there was a teleportation, one that's pretty well. Teleportation, there was like a jumper, warp, and snatcher were all advantages in that section. And if you take them with the 10% reduced cost limitation that they're connected to your teleportation, they get the advantage of the +1 per level of your teleportation talent, but they can be blocked if anyone has something that blocks teleportation psionics. That's really, that's as simple as it is. So psionics work off of the advantages system, and magic works off of the skills system, and ultimately you can use them interchangeably with different fluff as you would so choose. They have templates, and ultimately they only have a couple templates in this for each different thing, and it's really to give you an idea as a GM. Like they have character templates, which would be like classes, where essentially you would buy this group of advantages, disadvantages, skills that would make you like an investigator or a mage, etc. And then they have racial templates. The game that I'm, because I'm essentially testing out the system with my friends, the game I'm running is a sci-fi one, and I just made some cool alien races, just sort of based off this idea of, you give whatever attribute modifiers, advantages, disadvantages that they're going to have, and you add up the points, and you say, you give it to them as, here are your options. And then they have other things. Meta traits are, similar to that, only they essentially stack on top of something. Like if you're going to be a machine, if you have a digital mind, etc. Then we have the equipment section. Equipment first goes over the cost of living and how much your characters have to spend monthly just to get through their basics of life. And then they go through, the legal of buying some weapons and that kind of thing, tech level of different weapons. Let's see. And then how the charts work, and they start going into charts. Different melee weapons, which will have, the tech level of an axe is 0, axe. It does swinging damage. Swing damage is based off of earlier in the book, based on, I think, your strength. It'll give you based on what your strength is, it'll give you a basic swing damage. You would add 2 to that, and it's cutting damage. It has reach of just, 1 space. and essentially like costs of 50. Everything's in dollars units. And then essentially, so you would just change that dollars to whatever the world's currency is within it. You have its weight, requires strength 4, and then some of them will have notes, which will be at the back of each section. There'll be notes. You have their ranged weapons. They have firearms, ultra-tech firearms like, you know, blasters and laser pistols, heavy weapons. They have armor for different regions, because there's essentially hit locations and where the armor covers, and it has rules for stacking armor, because you can put different types of armor in different places. It really lets you customize what your armor is. I love that. That's so much flexibility. But, you know, different, essentially their armor is broken down, you know, low-tech armor, high and ultra-tech armor. High-tech is like more of modern, ultra-tech is like sci-fi. You know, and it goes up to like battle suits that, you know, are like, you know, for sci-fi, like almost like low mech kind of suits. Then they have horse armor, which could of course also apply to any other type of mount. They have shields, and then they have this 2-page spread of just miscellaneous equipment, which is really the basics to get you going: camping and survival gear, communications, information, law enforcement, medical tools, transportation references, page 459. I should point this out. This book only goes up to 336. That other book, the basic set campaigns, continues where this one left off, and a lot of stuff will reference further in. So eventually, as I said, I'll need to get that book, but this will be enough to go. Character development, chapter 9, goes over leveling up your character. And you don't, you know, level up like you would in D&D or Pathfinder. Instead of experience points, you're given the same points you built your character with. I think at some point it suggests, you know, between 1 and 5 per game session. And those points essentially can be saved up and then spent to buy new things, as long as it makes sense to do them. So it goes over, you know, how, you know, making sure that it makes sense. And then improvement through study. Skills, if you spend in-game time, especially free time, studying, you can raise your skills pretty slowly, but it's, you know, essentially a way to actually, you know, get more stuff done. And then they go over transformations, and what happens with supernatural modifications. Do you have to spend points on it? Do you not? A lot of times, if it's forced upon you, you're probably not going to have to do it. And then, of course, they go over death. Is it, you know, permanent, or depending on the advantages or whatever. Then they have trait lists, advantages lists, disadvantages, skills, modifiers, spells, techniques, etc. They go over like charts just to organize it for you. They give us some iconic characters, which they have a group of characters here in this game, and they give us essentially a story about them and essentially a character sheet. They give us, you know, a few of these that really just start to give you an idea of what characters look like. And then we have Combat Light. Combat Light is the basics of what you do in combat, which is, you know, I think if I remember looking through the table of context in the other book, it is like 3 chapters in the campaigns book, in the second book. But this goes over the, you know, how the turn sequence works, what maneuvers you can choose to take during your turn. Each turn is 1 second. With ranged attacks, attacking, defending, damage and injury, and then it goes over recovery and fatigue points. And then, of course, it has their character sheet in the back. So, I mean, it gives, you know, the combat's really the only gameplay kind of section. Most of the book is creating and leveling up and fleshing out your character, and it has so much for that. The basics of play are available in the GURPS Lite, which is free online. And that gives, you know, in addition to the different types of dice rolls that there are, it's all D6s. The only dice it uses are D6s. It goes over, you know, it has some of the same stuff, you know, it has a couple pages of advantages and disadvantages, enough for you to get an idea of the way that they work. So I'll link first. I'll link to this, and so definitely check this out just to see how the game system works. It's free. It's on their website. They provide it, just so you can check out how GURPS works, and I'm loving it. It gives me so much variety. I mean, I've used D&D and D20 Modern, and then went into different settings with Modern, so I could do sci-fi and so much work. And just the idea of having one system that, with a bit of GM saying no, that doesn't make any sense in this setting. With the players, when they're wanting to, I'm building my robot. I want to just be able to touch the humans and have them heal. And I'm like, ugh. If you can't defend how that makes sense, I'm not seeing how it makes sense. And, and I can work with them, but ultimately, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, I'm like, I can be like, hey, we'll run another game in a different setting. We'll run a magic game, and you can be the healer all you want. This one I'm probably going to want a bit more of a gritty, you need to be a doctor robot, and you actually have to go through the processes of repairing them and that kind of thing, just depending on what your game you want. They have a whole bunch of other books for GURPS for different settings. Many of which are just ebooks, but certainly, plenty of hard copy books as well, especially the main two are easy to find. The two basic set, which have enough for you to get ideas for any setting. So I'll link to where you can get the GURPS Lite, so you can check out the system, and I'll link to where you can go buy GURPS basic set characters online. Of course, it's available at many local gaming stores. So I'm going to go help my players as they're creating characters, and you have a good day. Bye.